Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. And this time I'm back with Tower of God. And we're doing a walk up again from episode 61 to episode 70. Now, just a little bit of a heads up. This may get a little bit confusing because there's a lot that happens in a short period, and the end of result from the battle is really confusing for most people. So you'd have to wait for the next day's 71 to 80 to actually have a proper recap of this entire battle. So yeah, let's just go at it. Okay. So as we see at the moment, episode 61 kicks off. Anak assaults the floor with her flying board, and we see that Balm is running towards the room. He gets ambushed by some regulars, and he actually takes their ammo from them and basically disqualifies them from the game instantly. We then see Anak and Ran meet, and Ran tries to convince Anak not to fight, but he's rude in the way that he speaks, and they basically aggravate Anak to a fight. So while Anak is fighting, she ends up sending a kick which Ran dodges, and Novik decides to block, which is a big mistake since we know how powerful Anak can be, and that ends up sending Novik flying. Then we have Huts facing off with Casino for the second time. Now this is the second time they are facing off, but it's the first time we get to see them face off against each other. And we see Huts disarm Casino immediately, and their fight starts going. And we see Casino basically warns Huts that if he keeps up this fight, he's going to lose because he's a greater weapon than his sword. And we see Shibisu speaking about the fact that they're fighting each other, and we see that the B on their team, I'm forgetting the name, I'll remember the name later, basically says that hasn't Huts lost to Casino before, and basically Shibisu says once he has lost to someone, he's definitely going to find a way to win. And he basically says that Huts won't lose, he doesn't think so at the very least. And we see that Huts has been training for this very purpose, and we see that he can even break the defense of Casino, which was a big shock because Casino is a living ignition weapon. And we find out that he sharpened his stance and skills so that he could cut through all of the defenses. Then we see Casino fighting, and he finally decides to give Huts a little taste of energy. I believe we see an ignition of his devil. Then we get back into the building where Ran is sent in, not Ran, sorry, where Novik was sent into the wall, and Ran and Anak are now going to have their big fight. It's at this point that we see Ran deploy his special Shinsu skill, the Thundercloud, and we're gonna go on to episode 62. As I said, this chapter can be really confusing because of how quickly they're swapping between battles and the fact that battles aren't stopped. So the next one starts with Huts talking to Casino, and he basically gets a reply from Casino saying that he envies him because his weapon gets stronger with its owner. And then we see Casino going to the full ignition, and he snaps Huts' sword. And basically Casino says sorry about that, and we'll see you at the station, basically at the match. And Casino shoots Huts, and Huts ends up teleporting. We then go back to Anak vs Ran. So Ran uses his cloud, and he covers the entire room in the Thundercloud. And we see Anak send her spear at Ran, and then Ran comes out and attacks. Now, one of the weird things is Anak is actually stronger than Ran, but Ran is most definitely faster and most probably more cunning than her. And the two end up fighting quite heavily, and we see that she uses her tail in every part of her. We see Ran resort to his heavy Shinsu assaults in the form of Espada Grand, the Grand Sword, the lightning spear bearer techniques that he has. And we see that Anak has been trying to catch him, and she ends up swiping her hook around, and she ends up getting some blood on it. And she's thinking she didn't hit him, so where did the blood come from? And then we figure out that it's actually Novik who had the assault on him. And while she's fighting, she thinks that this guy reminds her of Kun. And she doesn't really like Kun because Kun is hard to fight against. He may not be physically stronger than her, but he's way too difficult to fight because he's very sneaky. So she just decides to blow everything out from the entire floor, and then she sees just a single little cloud left, and she attacks it, at which point Ran jumps through the window, and he basically has her at point blank with the gun. And we see that they both facing off each other with the gun at the same point, at which point Viol jumps into the room and he uses reverse flow control on both of them, and I believe he ends up sending them both up to the ship. So that's where episode 62 ends, and we can go on to episode 63. We then get Vadi and her playing with Prince and Miseng, and we see that Wagner is trying to basically find out what he can do from Kun, because he basically threw a tantrum saying that he'll kill himself if he doesn't get to save his teammates. And we see Kun warn Wagner not to get anywhere near Vadi because she's way too dangerous. And then we see Kun running off to see what Shibisu's team is up to. Then we see Bam basically, or Viol, send both Ran and Anak up to the ship. He hits them with the light bullets and they both get sent away. Then we see Viol talk to Novik, and he basically explains his little plan and what he's going to do, and that he needs to go around and give them all the order from him, that they need to all get sent up, and basically that's what goes down. At this point, we see Viol head down to where Shibisu and one of his teammates are. And he basically says he doesn't think he came here without a plan. He must have a way to counter him. And we see Viol says he's going on his own. He doesn't really need support. And he ends up going down where we see that there's a massive fight going on. And there's a lot happening in this year. And we have to remember that this is all over the thorn. This is actually what the big key aspect of this is. And the person who's fighting as the scout of this team is actually Hwari Yun. She's fighting with another set of weapons as another persona altogether. And we see the wave controller from Shibisu's team, the B, is fighting with her, and we see Shibisu is helping get the perfect angle for every assault and trying to pin down the movements. At that point, we see that other assaults are played at the same time, and we see Viol arrive just in time to save his teammate. And that is where episode 63 ends. We're going to get to episode 64 now, and things are really confusing as it stands because there's so much we don't know. As I said, things might only clear up in the next half when we finally understand what's been going on for all this craziness. So we see Shibisu had got the hint that he doesn't look as sinister as he looks, but it's still surprising to see him. He didn't think that he would look so innocent. Right? He doesn't look like a slayer. He looks more like, they don't have a word. So Hwari Yun's persona right now is Yato. She's acting as Mr. Yato, who was part of this team. another scout who was on the duty to trade places with her when the time came right. At this point, we see Viol pull a piece of fabric and cover his mouth, and he decides to go on to Shibisu. And we see Viol warn them to leave, and at this point we see Vadi use her octopus to constrain Viol's usage of Shinsu, and then we see that it starts pumping out Shinsu like crazy. Because Balm has the gift of Shinsu, his Shinsu resistance and the amount of Shinsu he can use is absurd. So yeah, the octopus just starts flooding out water from nowhere. At this point we find out that he can't use wave controller, assaults and attacks, and we see that they decide to use Amigo against Viol in the situation, and the close combat starts, and he's fighting both a wave controller and a fisherman at the same time. At this point the fight is getting crazy, and he's still evading and taking on the hits from these guys. And since Viol can't use Shinsu reinforcement, he decides to use his close combat style, and when he ends up taking a hit, he ends up getting saved from the bee's stinger by Huariyun, who takes a hit for him and ends up dropping down being poisoned. And then we find out that there was poison in it, and we see that Viol decides to give up playing nice, and he says he needs to find another way to end this quickly. He then charges straight into Amigo, and we see that the shell of the thorn suddenly pops out of his body. It's the container for the thorn that they left inside him. At this point we see him knock down Amigo with a single hit, and his fighting strength instantly increases crazily. That's the end of episode 64. Then we see him fighting with the bee. I believe the name of the bee is something similar to Vadi. I'm just not 100% sure, which is why I haven't said anything. He then knocks the bee down instantly, and he says he'll kill the bee unless they counteract the poison right away. And Shibisu thinks he had all the intel that he needed. He found out that his main source of power was Shinsu, and that he was weak in close quarters combat, that he used Shinsu skills for most of his combat, and that he wasn't all that powerful physically, but from what he can see he was really super strong, and it was probably that he managed to cover up all of that. And we see that Shibisu says they'll get revenge at another time, and he can either lose his teammates now and not stand a chance, at which point we see Shibisu say Vespa should give the honey over to cure the poison, and that happens. Then we see Huriang face off against Vadi, and we see that Wagner shows up also to save his friends, and we see Huriang basically leaves the fight. Vadi takes off with a big octopus of hers, releasing many regulars all at once. Then we see that Shibisu sends his teammates up, and Viol rescues his own teammates. And we see that Shibisu realizes that something is weird about Viol, because he actually cares about his teammates. Then we see Novik enter, and he is shocked because this is actually something spectacular, because Kun Aguero Agnes, or AA as they call him, Aguero Agnes, actually had something to say about it. He actually said that Shibisu's team was very, very powerful. All of their members are super elite and super difficult to take on. Not only did Balm prove that he is superior to Ender Rossi in terms of power already, but he proved that he's also superior to the others as well, and that he can do a lot of crazy things. He just needs a little bit more skill with the crazy power that he has. And we see Novik says that he shouldn't take so much of a load on himself, and we see that he says he will do it provided he can keep everybody else safe. And he says that he doesn't care if he breaks apart so long as everybody is left okay. And we see that Kun is there, and he thinks about how heavy of a burden is resting on Bam, at which point we also see Rak in the shadows. So we see Shibisu doing a calculation, and he figures that with that type of physical strength and with his Shinsu topped on top of it, he is definitely within the rank of the top 5 E rank regulars. However, I did explain he's already at the rank where he can tie with rankers, which should put him somewhere around the A rank level of regulars, which is where he was at the start. And all of this doesn't make a lot of sense. So we see Shibisu head off to Vadi, and they end up sending everybody up, including Laure, up to the Archimedes. Then we see there's 21 tickets left, and everybody starts getting shot. We see there's 16 left, and everybody starts transferring themselves up. We see the tickets finally hit 0, and the workshop battle one shot, one opportunity ends. At this point, we see Ender Rossi. She finally takes down the level 99 Blue Dog Patrol, and she catches Traveler. And then she asks, where is Jovial Grace? And he says that wasn't Jovial Grace. His name is the 25th Bomb. And Ender Rossi doesn't catch on to it instantly, but when she figures it out, she says, what did you say his name was once again? And we see that the workshop battle has started. So that's where episode 65 ends. Now we get it transferring over to episode 66. Now you have to understand that there's a lot of confusing things that happen as it is. We need to understand where a lot of the players are along the route, and we need to understand why things are happening in the order they are happening on the ship, because things are going to be very confusing at this point, so please bear with me. It's not my narration that's bad, it's how the story may seem to be structured, but it has a better point when you get further down. We see that Ayo and his mate, I think it's Ayo and Punk, I'm not 100% sure, the hosts, they busy checking how much of donations they've collected, and they are being led by Madarako. Now Madarako is a high ranker Pampag. He's part of another Slayer's entourage, basically one of his followers, and he's helping them for this whole story. And they explain that they're going to make a lot of money out of this because they have the Mad Dog of Yama, they have the Slayer nominee, and they have a Princess of Jahad in this round. So the tournament will have big turnover, and a lot of people will try to watch it for entertainment. And we see that they're not worried about anything happening to them because they have actually cut corners and set sail early. Now this is important to what's happening in the story, and they say even if someone gets word of this here, so long as the research is completed, they won't have to worry. And he says he's going to make this the best workshop ever for their for their earnings. So they're now thinking once they complete Emily, everything will be fine. She's going to be the greatest weapon they ever made. Then we see Madarako is watching over them with other FAG members, and he's basically saying kids must have fun, it's healthy for them to play in the water. He's looking forward to their party the next day because the rankers get to watch over the regulars in this year, and once everything is done, things are going to go crazy. We then see that they're in the pool and they're playing and having fun. We see Vadi's playing with the octopus, and we see a lot of other regulars are having fun. We see Shibisu is watching everybody play. Then we see Baragrav's friend show up. Her name is Ron. She's basically there because she's friends with Anak, and basically Anak is torturing Shibisu because he's looking at girls and all of that, and we see that they're all just relaxing around. We see that Hats is searching for a replacement weapon and that he's really down, and they're wondering what's going on with Ender Rossi, and they explain that it's easier to get a news report from Ender Rossi than to actually talk with her because she's so famous and she's always having to have to cover things. We then see Ender Rossi saying some things to a news report, and once she is done, she basically says she's tired and that they should leave her alone or else. Then we see her looking over at jovial Grace, and she's wondering what is going on with him, and she's really confused about it, and she really needs to dig a little bit deeper into finding out what's going on. She then heads off to the jail section where she turned in the Traveler, and we see that the security allows her in instantly. She then goes over to the Traveler and she asks questions, and basically the Traveler says that she betrayed him and turned him in. And we see that they talk about what's going on, and he explains that he's here to save Emily, and that Emily is a real person, and that that on the ship is where she is, and they basically explain about it a little bit, and things end here with Ender Rossi and Traveler. We don't get the rest of this conversation till after the workshop battle reaches its end, where all of the craziness happens with the backstabbing and the quadruple betrayals and all of that going down. We then get into a room with Kun and Wagnan, and they're asking who the crocodile is, and he basically introduces himself, and that is the end of episode 66. So right, let's get on to episode 67. We then have Rak talking to Kun, and he basically Rak explains that Waryun is the one who told him how to find Kun, and that Kun was alive, and gave him all the information. And Kun is wondering why in the world did she inform Rak, since Rak was so unpredictable and hard to control. It'd make this whole thing a big mess. And we find out that Rak knows everything, that the yellow turtle betrayed them and the whole story. And then we see Rak asking why is Kun hesitating, taking action. We then see that Wagnan and the rest of Team Sweet and Sour are talking to each other in the front room. Now you have to understand something. There's a lot going on over here. Wulayuk Song is involved in this whole story. We may have actually met those who are involved right now in the Archimedes, or it may have been other people in the patrol, but nonetheless they are here. We know that Baragrav is involved in this whole story. We know that Madarako is involved. We know that Gustang is involved. All of this is part of what's going down. Then we see Cheng basically explains that there was nowhere else for him to be, that's why he's with Team Sweet and Sour. Then we see Rax and Kun flying out through the door. And we see that Quantro Blitz calls Rak a dinosaur. Then we see Kun and Rak really get heated when Kun sends Rak flying in. Iwa accidentally sets Rak on fire. Then we see Wagnan says that he thinks that Rak and Kun are very close, and they explain that they met on the testing floor. And Wagnan explains that he can see through Kun's deception. And Kun explains that it's always been his habit to protect anything he really likes and not to ever keep it on himself and show it for everybody, because it's better to protect things. Then we see Eva is trying to feed jelly to Rak, and because the jelly is blue, he says it just reminds him of Kun, and he's really all in a fussed up mood. And in the end, we see that Rak and Dan start speaking, and we see that Dan says that to Rak that according to what he found out from Ran, that they were like Kun's family when he just started his exam, and that he's really close with them, and that Kun is obsessed with what happened on the testing floor. So we see that they have their little conversation, and that it was one of the most happy points in Kun's life when he met the team that he met on the test floor. It was a fortunate situation, and it became very unfortunate in the end. Then we see that Missing and Quattro Blitz start chasing Rak around because he's so small and cute, and they just want to take pictures and hold him and play with him. And Quattro just wants to burn him just for the sake of it. You know how crazy it is. Then we see Rak and Kun talk, and we see that Kun explains that he actually has a plan, and that he actually wants Kun back. Not Kun back, sorry, that he wants Bam back. And he says that he hasn't hesitated at all from the start to bring Bam back. He's just going to do it in the most cunning and evil way possible, even more evil than Pug. And we see Vio looking up and looking at the sky, looking at things. We see that on the third floor of the Archimedes, Hats is using Emily to try and find a weapon to defeat the devil's right arm, which is leading him to the workshop. And we see that Chibisu convinced him to let go of his sword and to find another weapon, and it's quite a hard thing to do, and we'll find this out later when we get a conversation with other individuals. Then we see that they come to the Archon workshop, and this is the place where you can find a sword to stab the devil. And he says it looks more like a restaurant when he first sees it than an actual place to buy a weapon. And then that is the end of episode 67. We get into episode 68. We see Ender Rossi playing around with Emily. And we see the rest of her conversation, and we see that Emily's life may be in danger according to what the traveler found out, and that he's here for that very purpose, and that the place to look for the whole and the place where she lives is the Archon workshop, which we found out in the last episode is where Hats is heading. And we see that Ender Rossi doesn't care about saving Emily. She has other things to worry about. At which point we see Hats tries to open the Archon workshop and walk in. When he sees the devil's right arm and the devil's left arm coming, that's Cassino and Ilma, they both enter and they walk straight into the Archon workshop, at which point Hats sneaks in and follows them. They then see Miss Sophie and they find out the whole story about their research. So we do get that whole flow of things, and we see that Hats is watching over them. And we see that they seem to know a researcher. That's the way Hats describes it. And we see that Hats is caught by an unknown. The individual he's caught by is Beta, at which point Cassino catches him and locks him up in a room, and that is the end of what's going on here. And we see Casino locks him in, and Beta keeps walking on. And we see that they say that he's like a brother to them because he's also part of the same type of a project that they were part of. And there is a lot going on in the situation. As I said, there is so much to explain, and most of it traces back to the thorn in the start, and then things go on to Miss Sophie herself, and things turn back to the middle area of the tower, and it just gets crazy. So we see that they're looking around in the ship, and they see the core for Emily, this massive Shinsu pod where they process all of her power. And then we see Lyra Rowe as a guard on this section, and we see that this is the end of Workshop Battle Archimedes, the end. So we know that the next thing is actually the Workshop Battle itself, and everything which is going to happen here is going to get crazy. So we see that they start the Workshop Battle at the end of that one there with a quick announcement at the end of 68. We then move on to episode 69. As I said, things are very confusing. I can't even wrap around them properly myself until all of this image is actually pulled through. We don't know what Lyra Rowe is up to. We don't know why Hutz got the information about the lab. We don't know what Emily is up to. We don't know what's going on with Miss Sophie. We don't know that Beta isn't part of the project. We don't know what Fug wants with Balm in this whole situation. We don't understand why things seem so set up for failure and why there's so much going on all at once. Things are just out of control, and we have to try and put it all together with our common sense and figure it out all for ourselves. So yeah, we get on to the Archimedes in episode 69, and they say the battles will begin soon. So we see Jovial Grace and his whole team are walking around, and we see that regulars run up to him and they start making demands of him because he needs to make the 10 great families pay for how they made other people suffer injustices, and all of their sad stories. We then see that Baragraph's team is walking by, and they see the Slayer nominee, and they were like, if the Mad Dog was here, this would have been a big problem because he would just go straight at the Slayer nominee, and they suspect that Baragraph would have killed Balm. However, by judgment of the fact that he has the Blood Tamara, he would have been able to put up a good fight against Balm, but he would have gotten beaten down in the end. I think it would have been quite a challenging fight for Balm, but Balm would have won hands down. There isn't even a question in my head about it. Then we see Shia asking why there's such a long face on Viol's face, and we see Viol ask Shia if she has something personal against Jahar and the 10 Great Family, and she says no, not at all. And then he says that's such a relief that she doesn't have a sad story. Then we see Novik says that Shia shouldn't trouble him. And we see Novik explain to Shia he doesn't understand what she wants from him, but things won't go her way. And we see that Shia is feeling conflicted over what's being done to Balm. And Novik says, unlike everybody else, you can see that Balm isn't here to trample on everybody else. He is different from everybody else, and how should I put it, he's a radiant individual, and that it's better to leave those people alone. We then see Rak putting on a disguise, and we see that the whole explanation is that there's people who will fight for an individual like Viol no matter what happens. We then see Hutz and Anaka talking, and Anaka can actually relate much better to Hutz than anybody else about losing a weapon, and she basically says it'll take him some time to adjust to this here because he's lost a weapon that makes him very powerful. And then we see Shibisu wishing that Kun was around when Kun passes by the two of them. And then we see Io and Punk begin their starting of the round and they explain the way the workshop battle will work, which I'm also going to explain right now. So round 1 is actually an individual battle where each person from the team will face off in these small little arenas. A certain amount of regulars will get to pass with the whole mechanics behind it. Then round 2 is the team tournament in the water stadium, and finally is whoever wins the tournament for the final battle. So he explains that the tournament is basically made up of 2 sides. The team leaders are categorized as gamblers. So there's so many regulars who've been selected from each of the teams who are participating, who will be selected as gamblers. Depending on how much of money they can make, they can end up winning more money and taking part in the tournament by buying regulars. And the regulars who take part in the first tournament qualify to go on to the next level based on how they play. And we see who the gamblers are. It's Shibisu, Kun, Gunter, Rafleo from Bam's team, Belux, Hyanching, Rodney, Mia, Devil, Bon, and Ron. Now, what you need to understand is there are actually more than one Fug team in here. We know Rafleo and Ron are basically Fug. Then we know that Devil Born is Fug, and we know that Mia is Fug. So those are all of those who I know are Fug teams from this whole list. And basically, once the game starts, the gamblers aren't allowed to leave the room. And they explain that the regulars game, all the regulars have to do is actually slot their weapon into one of the slots in the center of the ring in order to qualify. And then they show the list of people who are part of each fight. And we see each list is made up of a number of individuals. We see Wagner, Arkreptor, Misang, and Prince are all in the same round. Now obviously this isn't fair because only 3 regulars can qualify. That means that the team was already set to lose 1 player. Then we see that IO begins the first match, and we see that all of the members are getting ready and that the gamblers need to place a bet on who they believe will win. And basically they can go all in at any time and it will be a greater payoff, but if they're too greedy they can end up with nothing and get knocked out from the tournament instantly. So they place their bets before the round starts. The round starts and everybody comes out of the rooms, and we see Prince has a face that's totally beat up, and we see Missing comes out in like a rage form. She has a berserk state active, and that is where episode 69 ends. Episode 70 is a little bit of a fight, and as I said, at the end of episode 80 there's going to be a lot to explain in this whole section. So we see everybody gets onto the arena where they have to insert their weapons, and they all go straight for Misang because she looks very small and weak, and with her berserk form she ends up pounding them off the map like a wild animal. And Wagner is wondering what happened to her, what in the world did they do. Then we see that Chibisu realized that Vadi had the girl, that's how come he's placing a bet on her. And we see Prince explaining that Vadi offered them to become her dolls, and that will make them way more powerful, and all they had to do was take a flower from her, and you know, everybody was screaming and yelling. And then we find out that Prince was locked in a room with her, that's how come he's so beat up, and she had the flower in her hair and she just went crazy and beat him up until the match started. And Prince explains that he thinks that she took the flower on her own and put it on herself, and that she feels it's her fault that Viol and Lurang were taken away from the team, so she thought if she could become stronger, she could get them back. And that she also remembered the days when she was kicked out from her own team. So we see that Arc Raptor and them come up with a plan. They're going to make her feel weak, and we see Arc Raptor really disses down Prince, saying that he's become really pathetic. He preferred it when he was an overconfident idiot who was willing to even try and take on the Slayer nominee, but now he's so afraid he can't even take on a doll. And we see Prince take on Missing, and then he uses his lighthouse to actually trap her, and he blocks her eventually in the end. And when he blocks her, he says, "See, you're not really all that strong, and that you'll never ever be strong." And they manage to actually use their inventory to pull the flower off her head, and that ends up snapping her back to herself. And we see that she starts crying on Prince and that she doesn't want them to leave her. And we see they all hold on, and we see the winners from this match is Arc Raptor, Wagnan, and Prince. Unfortunately, Miseng is knocked out because of this. Then we see Prince goes back to being himself, threatening to take down Viol. Then we see the next match that is scheduled has Varagrav in it, and that's Yama's Mad Dog, and that's where episode 70 ends. Hope that you all did enjoy this little walk up, because the next time we'll be covering the next part of the selection and the start of the next tournament. Obviously, I know where it goes, but the next part of the tournament is where a lot of these things start getting flashed out, where we find out about all the hidden betrayals, and we find out just about how much of crazy stuff is going on. We find out why things are going the way they're going, and as I said, there's a lot to go down for the story. So see you all then, and have a good day.